Welcome back to another video. Today I want to go over the S197 intercooler system, specifically on the 07 to 14 GT500. So I've done quite a few upgrades on my system. I want to share my experiences, as well as kind of show the knowledge I've found throughout the time trying to research this stuff, go down the rabbit holes, and kind of see what's going on. So we're going to break this down into three major components, and there's a couple of different variations to this depending on what you want to do. So first major component is going to be the heat exchanger itself. We'll talk about that. That's usually the upgrade everybody goes for. After that, it's going to be getting your pump sorted out. And lastly, the actual intercooler brick itself, which arguably, in my opinion, is the most important. So let's go ahead and go through the system. I'll do a quick rundown of what I have, and then kind of what that's led me to understand and believe as we've gone forward, talking with other people who have had good results and whatnot. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so this is my 2007 GT500. Last video went to the track, got pretty quick, and I was also able to get some good IAT results. So quick rundown of my system. So I have the J2 flow mod done to this car. So I mean, to take your intercooler brick, send it off, you have it ported to bigger ports, and then they send you a nice billet adapter plate, which is right there. You get your two AN fittings shooting around, and everything is 1-inch line. So this is 1 inch going from the tank. This bottom is 1 inch going to my heat exchanger, and then running around that way. So I have the AFCO dual fan, dual pass heat exchanger. I'll get into more into that in a minute. I have an ice tank in the back, and I have right here. So I have the ice tank, and I have a CWA 400 pump in here. So the pump, as well as the C-Max and some other ones we'll get into, all have 1.5 inch fittings. You're going to want to neck those down to 1 inch. So 1.5 inch is fine for the feed, 1 inch from here. So you do not need an ice tank. This is just my setup, and I'll explain why in a minute. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this whole. So if you're like me, you want performance, and you notice that especially in summer months, I'm talking when it gets like 80 degrees plus, a lot of times around here it'll get to 95 plus, freaking hot. And it being hot and not being able to enjoy the car sucks. If you live in Florida, you understand the pain. A lot of the southern states, it's not fun. So you need to beef up the intercooler more than you would necessarily in a more northern state. So on a 70-degree day, setup that I had before honestly was fine. It really didn't get too crazy. But what was happening is even then, basically my IATs would start here, and they'd be on a one-way rocket ship all the way up. So doing the quarter mile, I would see temps start with ice at about 110. And then it would get up to about 130 by the end of the quarter mile with no relief. After I did my mods, I see with ice once again, and it wasn't the greatest, but it was like kind of chilled-ish. I'd say lukewarm by the time we got to the actual front of the lines. Started at about a little higher, 120, dipped down to about 100 even, and then do little bloops up to about 118, back down, 118, one down, all the way to the end of the quarter mile with no noticeable rise in temperature as we're going down the track. So it'd stay in that range the whole time. Same with the street, same deal. Cruising temps don't really matter too much, but you do want your starting temps to be at least below 130 if you can. So, and then I tested my system out, ran it was about 126, wide open throttle, dropped to about 118, and stayed there throughout the pull. All right, so I mentioned the heat exchanger I have on this car, AFCO dual fan, dual pass. That came out probably back in like early, or I'd say late 2000s, maybe the 20 teens. And it's old. It's an old one. They've had two versions of it. It does okay for the stock system, but it's not the greatest. I don't think it's enough to keep up with the whole system. Even stock supercharger, they build a lot of heat. If you're running a big blower, big pulley, not generating as much boost, your heat's going to be better. I'm running a 2.3 liter, 2.6 upper, and a 10% lower, which that's about 17 PSI. I have cam, so it drops a little bit, long tubes, the whole deal. And then 2.5 pulley drops a little bit more heat, a little bit more temperature to worry about. So basically what happens is the act of the air getting compressed post blower is what's heating it all up. The blower itself, if you were to run this open air with no restriction on the bottom, temperature in, temperature out, you really wouldn't see a difference. It's that compression as the air heats up. Same if you were to run an air compressor, you feel the compression lines get real hot, heat sinks are needed, same deal. So the more free flowing you can make your car, the cooler it's going to run because there's less airflow restriction. It's going to be better, but beside the point. So let's start off with heat exchangers. There are really only three or four good heat exchangers on the market that are worth it. Now, I got most of this information from the Department of Boost, some people on Facebook, and my own experiences. So we're going to go ahead and run through that. So VMP is, I wouldn't say the number one, but this is one of the contenders. So VMP's dual pass or single pass heat exchanger with 1-inch fittings is up there. I would say for ease of fitment, and it has fans, if you want fans, go that route. The fans I'm back and forth on, because if you're in the staging lanes and you're not moving, how are you getting air across the heat exchanger to cool it down? In my opinion, that's where fans come in. If you're driving, road coursing, doing street stuff, not really necessary. If you have ice, also not necessary. So I'm going to a Department of Boost Super Single. That, in my opinion, is the best of both worlds. One is cheaper, and you get just as much core volume, just as much thickness, and it seems to test fairly well. So I'm going to be putting in a DOB Super Single. It should be here in about a week, and I'll get that installed in the next video. The other one is the Department of Boost Titanic, the big boy. The problem that I have heard, I don't have personal experience on this, but I've heard with the Titanic, is that it is a little bit too thick and too tall. Really good and needed for heat exchanger stuff. If you're doing hardcore road coursing, high speed runs, good stuff. If you're a little bit slower and you're doing a lot of stop and goes, you're doing more street stuff, it's probably overkill because it starts to cut off the amount of air that can actually get to the radiator, and your radiator fans, everything, gonna have to work a lot harder to actually keep that air flowing and keep the car cool. So that is the feedback. I was hearing a couple people online about it that have run it. So I went with the Super Single because I think it's about the best of both worlds. And the problem with the AFCO is it's a little bit too narrow, and the fins themselves are even narrower. So it looks pretty beefy. The AFCOs for other brands are pretty good, but for the GT500 specifically, I don't think it's quite there. So what is the point of heat exchanger? It keeps the whole system cool. Do you need the ice tank with that? Absolutely not. If you run the heat exchanger, that'd be the first upgrade you need. And you're gonna run your stock tank, you're gonna have a bypass set up, and we'll get to that in a minute. That's for when you start getting some flow upgrades, which you'll need next. So the bypass setup is basically the stock one comes off, it goes into the tank, it comes out of the tank, goes to the bottom. 1314s have the bypass already. If you're going to 1-inch lines, you 3/4 inch for the bypass to keep it going to your tank. So it's basically going to come out, go straight down. You're going to have a T that runs to your tank, and another T at the other side, somewhere down here, that runs to the bottom of the tank. That'll get any air out and let you fill the system up and keep flow moving without it all coagulating in the tank, causing much air and other crap to happen. So look up supercharger bypass for that exact diagram if you're looking for that. So that brings us to the next thing, flow. So once you get this thing cranking, it's now able to cool the fluid, but the problem is the fluid can't move fast enough. It's not going to work. Why do you need fluid flow? It does not have anything to do with the heat exchanger. I'll tell you that right now. It has everything to do with the intercooler brick. What happens is, think about it like a heat sink that has fluid passing through it, which is exactly what it is. As the hot air is coming down through the blower, getting passed through it, it starts to heat up that brick, because that's what it's doing. The fins are catching the heat, and it should transfer it to the water. If the water is not moving through there fast enough, the water itself in the brick starts getting too hot, and it stays hot and it can't cool down. Hence, that was my problem, the IATs straight through the roof. You can't fix that without upping your flow. So what is the next best bet? So the stock pumps on these things suck. Don't use them. They're absolute garbage. I think I got rid of mine because it only flows like 4.5 gallons a minute. Not even worth messing with. Car never ran well on that setup. So what are your pump options? So if you're staying 3/4 inch lines, you don't want to dive into the heat exchanger side of things, or the intercooler side of things. So heat exchanger, I still go for as big as you can. Use your silicone couplers like this that you can find, just 1 inch to 3/4 to neck it down appropriately, and run that. That's fine. So you're going to want to go ahead and keep your heat exchanger at 1-inch fittings for future upgrades. Pump wise, 1314 GT500 intercooler pump is by far the best pump for that size lines. The bigger pumps work fine, but necking it down, you're kind of defeating the purpose. And looking at the flow charts from Department of Boost, you pick up maybe 1/2 gallon per minute. The GT500 one will do fine. The only thing is, you cannot run that pump, I don't care what anybody says, you cannot run that pump off of the stock wiring. The wires are too tiny, they will overheat, and you're gonna have problems. So you're gonna have to either talk to Casey Moreno on Facebook. He has, I think it's WeWireEverything.com. It might be a different site now, race car or something or other. But anyway, he sells wiring harnesses for this thing. And what it's going to do is going to have an auxiliary hookup coming from the positive terminal. You'll have a relay that hooks up to your current thing, so it can still trigger like factory, but it's not pulling the main amount of power from that factory harness. It's pulling it straight from the battery, or in this case, right from here. This is how my intercooler fans are hooked up, right from there. And you'll have a happy life. You won't have to worry about anything overheating. So 1314 pump. And again, this can all be done front system. The next, if you're going 1-inch lines, you really want to do either the CWA 400 like I have, or the EMP, which I haven't seen in a long time. I don't know if they discontinued that pump. I can't seem to find it in line. It's really expensive. I don't think it's that good of a pump. I think it's just the demand is up. So you can get the CWA 400, do some research on the part numbers, but you can get those from Euro sites, and they're pretty solid. You buy your wiring harness, pin out with it, and then the only caveat, I'll show you the wiring real quick on that, is that it needs to get power all at the same time, because you're essentially putting it in emergency mode. So your power side over here are these two. Here's the relay right here, which powers the whole system. So the one in the front is off the factory wiring. There's a trigger wire, and the other one gets grounded. It runs to here as the trigger for this relay. And then, yeah, it gets power all at once. Boom, pump comes on. I tried to do it a little bit differently, and it was not happy. That's a whole video. Go check out that one if you're curious about the wiring stuff. So the other option is the C-Max pump. That is the one Department of Boost uses, and it's called from a Ford C-Max. It's a same deal as the CWA 400. It's meant for the primary cooling pump for the main water system in the cars, and they're built for reliability, longevity, and in my opinion is a good option, so you maintain that OEM reliability. So those are the three pumps. If you're really looking at anything else, you're kind of wasting your time in my opinion. So OEM GT4 500 pump, the C-Max, CWA 400, all three of those will do the job well, and you'll get great flow numbers. Last thing, and arguably most important, I honestly think you should start here before going anywhere else. And that is the intercooler brick. So I have a whole video on installing the JT Fab one. My stock brick's right behind me, which I'll show you right here. So I pulled this out earlier. This is for sale, which is why it's boxed up. But this is your intercooler. So the actual brick itself, see those ports? JT Fab Flow Mod will up those sizes. You can also do stock or take it to a machine shop, and they should be able to up them for you as well. You'll need to get your tubes first to make sure it's the right size, make sure everything's proper, but you'll be able to do that, and then you compare it with the VMP stuff we'll get to in a minute. So I don't know if JT Fab still does this. I got word on the street is that he does not, which kind of sucks. But yeah, so the actual brick itself is fine. It gets necked down to about 1/2 inch, and it cannot flow and keep up. So the whole brick heats up because water can't pass through it fast enough to keep it cool. So like I said, I did the JT Fab route. If I were you, I would do the VMP route. If you have you can actually bend the tubes on the VMP. They'll be able to rotate. They're not solid, so you can put them and rotate them up. I installed my power steering pump. So as you can see, I have one routed down below the pump, around the top of the pump, and feeding forward with some angles and whatnot, and no issues. Been running this for a little over 2,000 miles now, no problems. So the brick, in my opinion, is probably one of the most important things. So I didn't see any good gains until I did that, and then it's good. So to kind of recap, the main big things you want to deal with, you want to have the heat exchanger, keep all the fluid cool. The ice tank really only comes into play when you're at the drag strip. Otherwise, it's just part of the system, and it's not really doing anything special. So you really want to have it. In all honesty, like unless you're doing drag racing stuff, I would just keep it a front mount system. Keeps it simpler, less wiring, less lines to run, and in my opinion, works just fine. If you're doing drag racing and you want to go around the ice tank route, that's by all means go for it. But just be prepared to have more issues with trying to route lines. It's a pain in the butt. I wound up riding a line, one to this side and one to that side. It was a whole deal. Once again, I have a whole video out on that. But yeah, so heat exchanger, you got your three. You got your VMP, you got your two from Department of Boost. I wouldn't even look at any other heat exchangers. It's just not worth it in my opinion. I did upsize my lines on the AFCO to 1 inch. Didn't really change anything. Helps with overall flow, but didn't change anything for the heat exchanger performance. So those are the three. For the pumps, you want 1314 GT500 pump, the C-Max pump, or the CWA 400 pump. All three of those work fine. Just be prepared to modify the mounting brackets features. You're gonna have to figure out how to mount those. 1314 has its own mounting feature, which you can mount and figure out where you want it. Pay attention to orientation. This is not a job for the lack of attention to detail. Pay attention, do your research, check your wire gauges, make sure everything's good to go. All that stuff's listed on the pumps. You can read it and figure out what they actually require to run properly. So do your research, figure out the mounting solution, and that'll work there. 1-inch lines, I think, is a requirement, but you don't need them unless you're going to upgrade the intercooler pump. If you're upgrading the intercooler, not the intercooler pump, the intercooler itself, if you're upgrading the intercooler to 1-inch lines, the whole system should be 1-inch. Otherwise, with how much it necks down, it's not going to be any noticeable gains. So that's pretty much all I got on this. I would say by order of importance, pump, heat exchanger, and probably the intercooler brick, but all three of those work as a system, so you really won't see the great benefits until they're all done together. I'd start with probably heat exchanger, move on to pump, do those at the same time if you can, and then lastly 1-inch upgrade with the intercooler if you're looking for a one and done system. So that's all I got. I've had a couple questions on how this works. I wanted to go over it with you guys, my results and what I've seen with this whole thing. So thanks for watching, guys. I will see you in the next one. Leave any comments down below, any systems down below that work for you. But the main thing I care about is I wanted a reliable street car that I could get on at any point in time and beat on it. If I want to go to the drag strip at the ice tank because my wait times suck, they're like an hour-and-a-half wait lines, and just sitting there on the staging lanes, either idling or with the engine off, it gets too damn hot. It's not worth it. So that's where I'm at with everything. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take it easy and let me know what your thoughts are down below.